Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the seminar on financing the net zero transition. I'm Kathy from the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, and on behalf of the HKMA Infrastructure Financing Facilitation Office and GFANZ, we are delighted to welcome you here and those who are joining us on Zoom. Let's kick off today's seminar with welcome remarks from Mr. IFFO, CEO of the Hong Kong Academy of Finance. Mr. Fong, please.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to all of you and good morning and welcome to the Hong Kong Academy of Finance office. And also we're very honored to play host to today's seminar, co-hosted, co-organized by the HKMA IFFO-GFANZ on the topic of financing the net zero transition, which is also part of the program throughout the week of Green Week Hong Kong here. Addressing climate change in Asia is, of course, an urgent matter, given the region's growing need to build resilience and also adaptive capacity against the impending risk brought by climate change. It is estimated that the region would require $66 trillion worth of climate investments over the next 3 decades. On the other hand, there is also a need to mitigate the potential negative effects of a disorderly transition, including restricted access to affordable and reliable energy sources, unemployment, and other broader social impacts. So as Asia continues to chart its course through more innovative transition finance strategies and approaches, it would make a meaningful contribution towards the global effort in addressing climate change, considering that the carbon emission from this region accounts for around half of the world's total. However, there are several developments that are necessary to bridge the gaps hindering the planning and the implementation of transition finance in Asia. I'd like to highlight 3 necessary developments here to hopefully stimulate today's discussion a little. First is the development of more green market infrastructure. How can market participants be more creative in designing capital structures that can attract a broader diversity of capital providers and at the same time identify more bankable projects with suitable risk profiles? How can we promote blended finance opportunities to local and international investors? Notable progress is seen by policymakers and multilateral development banks along these dimensions, and it is important we continue to sustain the momentum through collaborations. Second is the need to develop more accessible tools and credible data sources. How can market participants better evaluate the credibility of the transition commitments by companies? Part of the solution lies in the collaboration between public and private sectors in order to provide more inexpensive and accessible tools. For example, the Green and Sustainable Finance Cross-Agency Steering Group, which is a consortium of financial regulators and government agencies in Hong Kong, has been doing a lot of work on building data repositories and platforms using technology, and has also recently launched a website containing a variety of data sets for the public to use. Just last week, the Hong Kong UST, under the leadership of Christine Low, here with the support of the steering group as well, launched an estimator which aims to assist corporates and financial institutions to estimate their greenhouse gas emissions. I heard the reception has been rather positive, and I would encourage you to reach out to Christine to learn more. Of course, throughout the event this week, we've also heard a lot about how to leverage technology or climate tech to enhance efficiency and transparency. Third is the development of thought leadership in more Asia-specific transition challenges at a global level. In particular, how can we be better ambassadors to the world for our own climate transition journey? One important aspect is that we need more gatherings like these throughout the Green Week to engage with the global international community in our transition finance agendas. Well, Dr. Ma Jun here has been an active voice for Asia at various international forums, including his previous role at the G20. We also welcome GFANZ's plan to set up a Hong Kong chapter, which can also help to strengthen that international tide. Our financial regulators in Hong Kong has also been very active in participating and also leading in various international regulatory working groups and task force, which allows Hong Kong to stay at the forefront of the international regulatory developments. We also need to further bolster the region's research capacity and also talent pool. I understand that the HKMA, IFFO, and also GFANZ have been doing a lot of work on these fronts as well. Hong Kong, as a regional sustainable finance leader, has a role to play. The steering group is working on various initiatives to further enhance disclosure standards, leveraging technology to support sustainability reporting and data analysis, and promoting transition finance in Hong Kong. The Hong Kong Academy of Finance was set up 5 years ago in collaboration between the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, the Securities Futures Commission, the Insurance Authority, and also the Mandatory Provident Fund Authority. Our mandate is to promote financial leadership development and also research collaborations. And we also have been promoting green finance in our various leadership development programs with thought leaders around the world and also researchers locally and also international universities as well, through our various leadership development and also research initiatives. Ladies and gentlemen, there are no silver bullets in addressing the many gaps and challenges ahead. But I hope with the exciting lineup that we have with you this morning, I hope our discussions can further encourage us to be more informed, more inspired, and more involved in the region's transition journey. I want to thank the co-organizers for putting together today's program, and I hope you enjoy the seminar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Fong. Today, we are also honored to have Dr. Ma Jun, Chairman of the Hong Kong Green Finance Association, to deliver opening remarks. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Ma.
Enoch, Yuki, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's my great honor and pleasure to join this session organized by HKMA and the GFANZ. In fact, I'm also holding the title of GFANZ Hong Kong Chapter Advisor, so this is the first time I'm actually using this to deliver a speech. By the way, I spoke a lot already last week, in probably 4 or 5 different sessions and talked a lot about transition finance. I'm hoping I'm not too much overlapping with what you've been hearing and what you'll be discussing today. But let me focus on the transition finance topic once again and try to tackle not only issues at a very macro principle level, but also some implementation issues and see if we can generate some new ideas and debate. Transition finance is a concept that's extended from the traditional green and sustainable finance. As you know, green sustainable finance in many places were largely defined by taxonomies. In China, I was leading the taxonomy development back 2015. And the last few years, I was co-chairing the common ground taxonomy work between China and Europe. So you clearly see this is a big table, what we call taxonomy. There are a lot of items like renewable energy, batteries, and water treatment, solid waste treatment, EVs, and so on. And these are the things which we call pure green activities or close to pure green activities, because at operational level, these activities generate very little emissions, and some of them are close net zero. And that's why historically, a large part of the green finance went to financing these pure green activities, but not the transition activities in carbon-intensive sectors or in hard-to-abate sectors. So really the question is, how do we mobilize enough money to help sectors such as fossil fuel, steel, cement, petrochemical, existing buildings, transportation, like aviation, shipping, and the road transportation to decarbonize. And that part of the economy, which is carbon-intensive one, is much, much bigger than the pure green economy. I said yesterday the pure green economy is probably 10% of GDP, and the rest needs to be decarbonized with transition finance. So potentially, transition finance is going to be much bigger than pure green finance. But how much you have done? I heard from China and also other places that it's only 1%. The purely sort of properly labeled transition finance in terms of dollar amount is about 1% of green finance that's been mobilized so far. So we have a huge challenge of setting up the framework to encourage channel a large amount of financing to the properly defined transition activities. That's why back 2 years ago, the G20 Sustainable Finance Working Group, which I was co-chairing that group at that time, came up with a transition finance framework. And that's what I call the macro sort of principle level framework. But I'd like to elaborate some of the implementational aspects of this. Now, the first aspect is the identification. How do we define transition activities? That's a key bottleneck for virtually every institution that I talk to on transition finance, because they're afraid if we don't have a clear sort of methodology approach to define the activity, we may end up with transition washing or being accused of transition washing. And there are two approaches that's emerging. One is what we call taxonomy approach. Now it's being taken by Europe, has a sustainable finance taxonomy, including some transition activities. Singapore came up with a taxonomy, which includes transition activities. And more recently in China, 7 local governments came up with their transition taxonomies. So again, it's a big table with a lot of technical pathways, and many of them are under the heading of the carbon-intensive sectors. For example, steel, cement, petrochemical, each have like 5 or 7 pathways, and you combine all of them, you become a big table. That's called transition taxonomy. And of course, others using principle-based approach, which means that as long as your activities is consistent with Paris Agreement, it's transparent, it's science-based, we'll regard you as qualified transition activity. But the cost of identifying that using principle-based approach is higher. You need to hire credible third-party agencies. Sometimes they charge you $1 million for that verification. And my suggestion is a combination of the two. The principle-based approach and the taxonomy. Taxonomy helps you to reduce cost because it's so clear, it's easier to see, from a banker's perspective and from a corporate perspective, which activities are broadly qualified as transition activity. Then you put in some criteria using the principles, such as, do no harm and consistent with Paris Agreement and transparency and sort of avoiding carbon locking and so on. So the combination of them, I think, can substantially reduce the cost of identification. The second big topic is about transition plan and transition plans disclosure. Now this is probably more difficult because historically we require all the green project owners to disclose their information, and that information is what I regard as a picture. Because you install new equipment, it will reduce carbon or reduce pollution, and it's simple to calculate with or without this equipment how much environmental benefit you can generate. And a transition is a process. It may take 20 years or 30 years or 35 years, and disclosing the entire process activity is a movie. And certainly, developing a movie is 100 times more expensive, maybe 1,000 times more expensive than taking a photo, right? That's why it's difficult. And it involves so many things as the G20 framework has put out. You need to have a credible plan. You have short-term, medium-term, long-term targets. Targets need to be consistent with certain criteria, for example, science-based. And the methodology need to be transparent. You need to have governance arrangements in place, all of these. And the challenge is that most of the companies wanting to transit, they don't know how to do it. And in China, when the banks were approaching the companies say, show me a sort of a model or example of the transition plan. That's why in one of the pilot regions in China, Huzhou, they came up with a template. They put it on the website. This is a transition plan. It's empty in terms of contents, but the wordings are there. You put in the numbers, the short-term, medium-term, long-term targets, and the technology you want to use, and the governance options. They have like 5 or 7 options you can pick. Then this template will generate a transition plan for the company. So this is the type of thing we need to do as a public good or semi-public good. And other part of the difficulty is that the basis for doing all the transition planning is carbon accounting. And a lot of companies, the large companies are okay in terms of scope 1 and 2. Most of the SMEs even don't know how to do scope 1 and 2. And very few companies know how to do scope 3. So who is going to do this? The problem is that if there are 20 consulting companies come to the firm saying, I can help you, and some charging $1 million, some charging 1/10, some charging 5% of the amount, and they do it in very different ways. It's very confusing, and they cannot be consolidated and compared. And that's, again, being addressed in Huzhou pilot program with a government-led carbon account system. And they did that for more than 20,000 companies, and saying, you come in and just show me the raw number. For example, the fuel consumption number. I'll create a carbon account report for you. your scope 1, scope 2. So it's a unified and a zero cost carbon accounting. And then all the banks can use it, just accessing the database for the 20,000 companies for free. So this is another public goods we need to generate in order to lower the cost of getting the basic elements of the transition plan for the corporates. The third thing is about products. Now, there are a lot of products already. For example, sustainability-linked loans and bonds. Some are user proceeds instruments, but we're still missing many others. For example, the equity products, which is key, I think, in many transition sectors, because these sectors typically are highly leveraged. And because of high leveraging, they're unable to get cheap financing in the market. The credit ratings are low. And that's why getting them enough equity is actually the first step towards their journey on decarbonization. And a lot of risks in the transition space, because they need to employ a lot of technologies, a lot of new tools which are untested. And the risks sometimes cannot be borne by the banks or the bond investors. They need to be somewhat insured with the de-risking facilities and so on. So all these are areas where we need to innovate in order to help the transition companies with a package of financial tools. The fourth problem is incentive. We are missing incentives. Historically, we talk about a lot of incentive for green finance. In China, we had a central bank providing cheap money. We had local governments providing the de-risking facilities and the low-cost sort of subsidies for interest payments. In Hong Kong, we had a grant scheme, right, helping the issuers to lower the cost of verification. And all of these are for green only. And we need to have incentive for transition going forward. I'm glad to see the budget speech yesterday by Financial Secretary Paul Chan saying that the Hong Kong grant scheme is now extending the scope to cover transition activities. And now that's a big step, I think. It will encourage a lot of firms begin to explore using the transition tools. But we need to be open-minded in terms of what type of incentive we can help the company to make these transition projects more bankable. It could be fiscal subsidies. It could be de-risking facilities. It could be blended financing instruments using MDB money, which is cheaper. And it could be using philanthropy money to help them with TA, project design, and so on. And it could be the voluntary carbon market, because the VCM will enable a lot of carbon reduction activities to generate additional income through selling their carbon credits. And it could be through the use cases creation. I was talking to a lot of technology people and officials on Monday when I was hosting the Green Tech conference here, that we need to create use cases for buses, for example, hydrogen buses. We need to create use cases for decarbonizing the building sector. If the government say, I'm going to decarbonize 100 government buildings within 3 years to net zero, it's going to create a lot of demand. And that demand is going to help a lot of companies which are in transition. Right? So these are the things which I think all in the hands of the government. And we need to forge private-public sector partnership to enable these scenario creation to become an incentive. And the final point I'd just like to mention is capacity building. The transition finance space requires more capacity building than pure green finance. After 10 years of development, green finance has gone up like 10-fold at least, and maybe 100-fold by some measures. So capacity is relatively equipped in many places. Of course, in many other places, we still need to have a basic green finance capacity building. But for transition finance, I heard from some banks that the salesperson from a bank going to see a client, a company, this salesperson needs to be trained for 100 hours in order to properly deliver the message, tell them what is transition, how to do transition plan, how to do carbon accounting, and what are the available technologies. So it's a very, very challenging task. It's a highly sophisticated job. It's not something like I'm selling, something from a department store. And that's why I think capacity building training somewhat, centralized, and led by government or by NGOs, I think will be very, very important. And we see a lot of capacity building efforts, everywhere. But many of these are sort of developed in silo for small audience narrow scope for a particular region, but we need something bigger that can aggregate knowledge from the world and distribute knowledge to the world at a much lower cost than otherwise. And that's why an effort called Capacity Building Alliance of Sustainable Investment was launched last year, putting a lot of efforts in launching this CASI, C-A-S-I. And we did this launch during the COP 28. At that time, we had 42 members. And some of our founding members are here. HKMA is one of the founding members. We also had the HSBC Standard Charter. They're operating here heavily. They're all founding members of CASI. And by now, it's 50 members already. And we hope we'll be using Hong Kong as a very important base to develop a capacity building program, both physically in Hong Kong and also broadcasting online. So we are actually planning already for a big CASI event in June this year for entire Asia. We want to bring something like 300 people from 30 different Asian countries, have them here for 3 days, then bring them to China, Huzhou City, to see the real cases of transition finance. So hope you're interested in helping us to develop the learning program and join our activities going forward. Thank you once again for the organizers, and look forward to a productive discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ma. Well, Dr. Ma, please stay on the stage. We have prepared a souvenir for you. We're also very glad to have Ina to present the souvenir to Dr. Ma. Ina, please. This is a Schroeder banknote keychain, which contains banknote waste discarded during the note printing process at the Hong Kong note printing. Thank you, Dr. Ma, and thank you, Ina. The transition financing needs in Asia are significant. In our first panel, speakers are going to share with us the key challenges faced by financial institutions, as well as some potential solutions. They will also discuss how Hong Kong, as a green and sustainable finance hub, can support transition finance in the region. Before welcoming our speakers, may I remind you that there will be Q&A session in each panel discussion. Audience may submit their questions through scanning the QR code here. Leading the first panel, we welcome Ms. Georgina Locke, Head of Market Development at the HKMA. Our panelists are Ms. Yuki Asi, Managing Director of Asia Pacific Network at GFANZ. Mr. Dennis Wen, Head of Capital Markets of APAC at CDP. Ms. Jenny Lee, Deputy Secretary General at Hong Kong GFA. Ms. Ivy Lau, Head of ESG Solutions at Mizuho Bank and Mizuho Securities Asia.
Thanks, Kathy. Good morning, everyone. I'm Georgina from HKMA. So today, I think Dr. Ma mentioned the importance of transition. So it fits very well with our first panel, which is on the regional transition financing needs. And we're very happy to have experts here to talk about their work in this area. So without further ado, let me just get right in and start off with Yuki. So in your view, what are the key issues faced by the region in terms of transition finance, and what is GFANZ doing to help facilitate their financing needs?
Yeah, good morning, everyone, and delighted that we are co-hosting this with HKMA. And I think a lot of the welcoming remarks, I resonate very much, and some of them are actually the same things that we identify at GFANZ and are working towards solving them. So we identify 3 main gaps for the financing, for the transition financing. And the first one is the data gap that Dr. Ma was also talking about. So basically on the data gap, we've made quite a lot of progress through like CDP reporting, TCFD reporting, and now we're moving to ISSB reporting. So we are gathering that data, but it's still, a lot of it is still proprietary. And so we need to make that much more accessible to everyone. And so I guess the breadth and the depth and the accessibility of data is going to be very important going forward. And the net zero data public utility is an initiative that is trying to bring all the different datas in one place on transition that will make it a bit more accessible to everyone. So the second gap related to that, so when you have the data, then you need to actually use it. And the next gap will be the action gap that we find. So we need more financing. I think Dr. Ma was talking about the need that currently it's only 1% of labeled transition funds, and we definitely need much more financing, both to the green projects, but in Asia especially, the transition, supporting the brown economies to transition is a critical part of our journey. So there, to actually push that financing out, we think that the transition plan is critical. Both the country's own transition plan, the corporate transition plan, and the financial institutions transition plan. And on that one, GFANZ is doing a lot for capacity building in Asia Pacific, and we are partnering with from the Hong Kong chapter. We will be working closely with the Green Finance Association, but also in the region with CASI, and also there is a global coalition on capacity building. So after that, once you have that action, the last one is the investment gap. So you have the net zero transition plan, but you really need to turn that into the to actual financial flows that are much more aligned to the Paris Agreement at the portfolio level. So we're not talking about a niche kind of financing anymore, but that the whole of your portfolio and your whole of your institution is aligned to the Paris Agreement. So there, in Asia, we also find that the biggest challenge we have is what is credible financing of a transitioning company. And so the credibility and the integrity, the environmental impact, making sure that the environmental impact is credible, because the problem is a lot of these will take time to pan out, which means that there needs to be more forward-looking metrics that help us to give an idea of which way it is going, and then for us to be able to monitor it over time. So there's a lot of different areas that APEC network at GFANZ is working on. And one of the ones that we have already done is to identify what is a credible financing of a managed phase-out of a coal-fired power plants in Asia Pacific, which is a very important part of the energy transition of Asia Pacific.
Thanks, Yuki. So moving on to Dennis. Hi. Yuki mentioned, the importance of having data, right? And CDP plays an important role in, collecting this data in terms of sustainability reporting. So can you tell us a bit about CDP's work and, how to support, firms and corporates and financial institutions in doing transition through your questionnaire and other areas of work?
Sure. Thank you very much. Well, my name is Dennis Wan of CDP, originally founded 24 years ago as the Carbon Disclosure Project. And I'm delighted to say that we have the answer to everything. We have the answer to the 66 trillion of funding that is needed because you need data. And I represent the largest platform for collecting environmental data in the entire world. It's global. 24 years ago, our founders thought to themselves, who hurts the world the most? It's big company, it's capitalism. We need to ask big companies what their environmental impact is. Thing is that we're an NGO, we're a not-for-profit, you're a big company, why would you listen to us? So then we went to connect that ask to financial institutions, the folks with the money, the folks who own the real economy. And we said, on behalf of the financial institutions, please can you start measuring your environmental impact? We'll give you a questionnaire, just as Dr. Marjan said. We'll give you the questions that you need to answer, and we'll gather that. And 24 years later, we have 746 institutions representing the financial markets, 137 trillion of assets that you have, asking the entire world of corporates to disclose their environmental data. Over 2/3 of the listed market capitalization of the world discloses its data on a primary basis to CDP. That's why we have this much data, which we then feed back to finance, which we then feed back to corporates, which we then feed back to governments and policymakers and the NZDPU, as you say. The NZDPU at this present moment only has information from CDP. That's the only data that you have in there. So there you go. We've sorted it. We've saved the world. I can go now. Problem is, not everyone's using it yet. Not every company in the world is disclosing yet. And we will not have succeeded until we have given this way of data collection internationally to as many corporates and SMEs and all up and down the value chain to say, let's collect the world's largest standardized and comparable data set, and then we need to do the capacity building, basically getting it into the hands of institutions so that they can design the sustainable products, the transition finance, etc., that is needed to direct capital in the right direction. So we're not done, but we do have a platform that we are offering for that. Now, to turn to the transition planning piece, if we've got 2 decades of data and thousands of data points, then obviously there's information in there which is relevant to transition planning. Last year, for the first time, we published a report on the credibility, as Yuki says, of transition plans. And there's 21 areas of data points in all of the CDP data. They break down sort of into 8 specific elements of a credible transition plan. Some of them are really obvious that you will recognize if you're familiar with TCFD, things like governance, things like scenario analysis. But then there's elements that are not so familiar with TCFD, such as policy engagement. Does your company engage with policymakers, be a policy shaper, not a policy taker? It's talking about targets. Do you have realistic targets that are actually entwined into the fabric of the running of your company? Because you've made plans after you've baselined with the data gathering and you've formed a transition plan, and are they absolutely entwined with the running of your company? And even scope 1, 2, or 3 verification and engagement with your value chain all the way up and down. These are all things that if you do them and you disclose on them, then these are elements of a credible transition plan. And there are certain industries that are doing okay, not great yet. Again, we're on a journey. The leading industries are actually power generation and financial services from the criteria of how many of the 21 data points have you disclosed on. But we're still only talking about 30%. But when we're talking about the companies that have demonstrated all 21 elements of a credible transition plan, unfortunately, financial services drops out of the picture. We're up at power generation and infrastructure, actually, even only at 2%, 1.7%. 0.4% of companies have a credible transition plan. When you look at it through the data, through what we've gathered, there's an awful long way to go. So maybe I have to take back that I have the entire answer here. But we are certainly there. We would love to be involved in the capacity building that the world needs. We would love to encourage the world to take those first steps of disclosure. Our motto is disclosure, insight, action to create the transition plans that we need.
Thanks, Dennis. So, Jenny, turning to Hong Kong, I just want to hear your views about, how do you think Hong Kong as an international financial center can play its role in supporting transition finance in Asia, and also what the Hong Kong GFA is doing to support, financial institutions transition planning.
Great, thank you. Look, I think we've heard throughout this whole Green Week from industry leaders, government officials, policymakers in terms of Hong Kong's role. I think it very much being kind of like the international financial center, having deep liquid capital markets, and also being kind of like product innovation, I think, is critical and key when we're thinking about transition and transition planning, because right now the labeling of transition is is still debatable, and what is transition? How do we provide this financing? So when we look at Hong Kong in terms of its platform for building a sustainable finance hub, we have launched kind of like the first world's green tokenized bonds. We have also launched the first retail bonds, green bonds, and then multi-currency, longest tenor, etc. So the platform is there in terms of providing product innovation that's proven, and it's also spurring on kind of like new emerging kind of like technology enterprises, etc., to also take on board and to utilize and the showcasing of standards, I guess, that has been set by the Hong Kong government. From the HKGFA perspective, we are 160 kind of like member association. We kind of like have really organized ourselves across like 5 working groups under 10 work streams to actually bring collaboration across and partnerships between the public and private sector together with the regulators to really mobilize kind of like a lot of this resources that's required to build capacity to be able to make this transition happen. So under kind of like the working groups, we focus on transition planning. Working together with our financial institutions, looking at how we can develop kind of like an online kind of like knowledge repository, because obviously there's a lot of standards out there from like GFANZ, the transition plan, CBI, etc. And then how do we organize that information so that the corporates can look and to be able to create these credible transition plans, and then to be able to then go to the financial institutions to seek, the financing that's required. We've also then looked at forward ahead, kind of like the biodiversity, TNFD, kind of like looking at what types of new disclosures will be coming down the pipeline, and then organizing capacity, like training webinars around biodiversity to, again, bring, I think, the understanding and foundational knowledge and information of the market up to speed. In addition to that, we're also looking at working together with CDP and also some of our other members and look at how do we address SMEs and how do we actually help them kind of like come on board the journey, to understand transition planning, and also how do they get to net zero. So we have a number of different initiatives that we have ongoing at the moment to help support the market.
Thanks, Jenny. Okay, so let's turn to Ivy and talk about, a bit on, your work on the ground in terms of it being a bank and, supporting transition needs of your clients and also yourself, and the bank itself in terms of the transition planning. So could you share a bit on your efforts and the approach that you use?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. This is Ivy from Mizuho. So Mizuho, as a Japanese bank, we have set foot in the Asia-Pacific region for decades, and we have been supporting the industrial development in the region for a long time. So we definitely, recognize the risks related to transition, be it like, the transition risks and also the physical risks, pertinent to climate change. So that's why, over the last couple of years, we have spent a lot of effort in creating what we call a Mizuho Transition Support Framework. Basically, it's a risk assessment framework. So it comprises of 2 axes, 2 dimensions. First of all, we look at, the sectors that our clients are operating in. As we have clients in multiple sectors, utilities, steel, cement, all are heavy emitting sectors, you name it, right? So we look at, the various sectors, the risk that is pertinent to that sector. So that's one axis. And the other axis is about the response that our clients are responding to the transition risk. So we've seen a lot of great work being done by industrial association, NGOs about giving guidance on what makes a credible transition. And if you look at each framework, each guidance, there are some common points. And I think one of which is worth highlighting is strategy planning. So strategy is important. Like we talk about net zero by 2050. So we are seeing clients, companies, they come up with their net zero targets. Having targets is important, is crucial, but equally important is their strategy planning, their action plan. Because without strategy, you wouldn't be getting there. And also, it's not about a snapshot, like Dr. Ma just mentioned. It's not a picture, what sort of targets that you're setting in 2024, but more importantly, your long-term, strategy planning. So with our engagement efforts, we, reach out to each and every companies and try to understand a bit more, how they respond to their transition risks. So we have a scaling system. We try to, rank them, according to their response. So, from the outperformance, like some companies, they do have their strategy in place. They do have a target, and also they have, third-party verification. Then those companies can rank, the highest score. And if companies, they do not have, any, strategy, not even like policy, trying to address some of the, the key issues. So we won't be, ranking them, very high. And after, doing this kind of exercise, engagement, then we will decide, what will be the next. So our stance towards transition is not like divest, immediately from the carbon, intensive sectors, because we know these kind of companies, heavy carbon-intensive companies, they do have a significant role in the future, in the, in the entire Asia-Pacific economic development. So divesting our, support from these companies just, wouldn't, make a sustainable future happen. So what we are trying to do is to, assess their and their response towards transition risks, and for those who are actually showing ambition, we'll still give our support. But for those who are remain in action towards addressing transition risks, then 1 year after our initial engagement, we will reconsider whether to continue our relationship with those clients. So that's how we try to manage the transition risk, not just from a client's perspective, but also from ourselves, because Mizuho, we also, try to set our finance emission targets. So by helping our clients to achieve their net zero target, decarbonizing, their business operation, then we only, by this kind of, efforts, then we are able to manage our finance emissions down the road.
Thanks, Ivy. So Dennis, hi. Ivy mentioned, her bank's engagement with clients, and in a way to facilitate this engagement process, the Hong Kong Cross-Agency Steering Group on Green and Sustainable Finance co-developed a questionnaire for non-listed firms with CDP to cater to, different levels of different size companies in starting this process of, transition planning and getting the data in to facilitate banks' business decisions in providing such finance. And recently, I just want to promote a bit, we launched a digital version of the questionnaire, and we also linked it up to the GHG emissions calculation and estimation tool, which was co-developed by the CASG and Hong Kong UST. So this is our latest development, and we look forward to working with you to further enhance this questionnaire. So just, for our benefit, may I just ask you a bit about how your future plans of further, enhancing the global disclosure, including questionnaire, and in particular, how to incorporate the ISSB standards that Yuki mentioned earlier today.
Thank you. So I've given a speech before about why a questionnaire will save the world. And that's because the way that we are, our mission to gather the world's data in much the same way as you engage with companies, provide it to decision makers, is through questions. So thanks for reminding me that I was going to also promote the HKMA CASG disclosure platform that was revamped last week into a digital format for use in Hong Kong. But why do questions actually save the world? It's because this is a very, very complicated topic. Every acronym that's been thrown at you today and more, you mentioned TNFD, you mentioned that there's taxonomies, there's ESRS, there's so many acronyms that not everyone can know everything, but anybody can try and answer a questionnaire. And so when TCFD was announced back in 2017, we already aligned the CDP questionnaire to ask the kind of questions that were going to be recommendations of TCFD. And year after year, we saw whether corporations and financial institutions were actually answering those questions in more and more detailed ways. And therefore, our data went back to TCFD so that they could publish a year-end status report on the adoption of TCFD. Now that TCFD is being absorbed into ISSB and TCFD is standard practice now, then you're asking, well, how will we ask the questions to help companies rise to ISSB? Even last year, before the announcement of ISSB, before the announcement of our partnership with ISSB, if you analyze the questions that we were asking, 68, over half of the questions that we were asking were, do you do this? Do you do this? Didn't even have to call it ISSB, such that companies that have been disclosing to CDP annually would be ready for the coming regulations. And so that's what we're going to do in order to get everybody ready for ISSB. You probably already are if you've already been disclosing to CDP, and if you have not yet, then when you start, you will be learning by doing. That's our version of capacity building. And we are beyond that, and we'll be asking the questions about biodiversity and TNFD and getting you ready with asking yourselves the questions to be prepared for what's coming.
Thanks. And Yuki, you mentioned that GFANZ will be setting up a Hong Kong chapter. Could you share with us a bit on the priorities for this chapter?
Yeah, thanks, Georgina. So, by the way, we are still recruiting the head of the Hong Kong chapter, and the recruitment is still open to application. So if there's anyone interested in applying, please find us at our LinkedIn, and you'll find the link for our application. So yeah, the Hong Kong chapter is our second country chapter in APEC, and a third, and it's also, now we've got a Brazilian country chapter. So we started with the Japan chapter launch in June last year. Hong Kong was announced by Mike Bloomberg when he was here in Hong Kong at the end of August. And we will be preparing the launch of that this year. And then the Brazilian chapter was launched at the G20 event last week. So each of these country chapters have different purposes and a different role. The Hong Kong chapter has its own unique role. So going back, GFANZ has, within the net zero alliances that we are part of, have 675 plus financial institutions that are committed to net zero. That's quite a lot, and it covers 50 jurisdictions around the world as well. So it covers about 40% of the global financial assets, private assets. But that means that the other 60% is still not officially part of the net zero. It doesn't mean that they are not working on net zero, but that they may be, but they are not officially part of the alliances. So one of the big mandate for the networks, the regional networks like the Asia Pacific Network, is to reach out to key markets where we don't have so much representation. And in Asia, we actually have the biggest markets, China, India, Indonesia, very much underrepresented in the GFANZ community. So outreach is very much one of the key mandates of APEC Network, and the Hong Kong chapter has a very strong mandate related to the outreach to China, because we realized that Hong Kong as the region is very much the hub of Asia and the global, and has very good accessibility to mainland China. So the idea is that, you know, we have such rich financial community in Hong Kong and in the region that can share the experiences of how they use the GFANZ standards and principles, and the others that are available in sustainable finance, and to share that experience, and also learn from the Chinese experience as well, so that we avoid fragmentation in the approach to, say, net zero transition planning, and have a common understanding of what is a credible transition finance. So that is definitely one. But outreach always comes with capacity building. And I think capacity building, we'll be doing a lot for mainland China, but also for Hong Kong itself as well. And this is where we find a lot of good opportunities to work with HKGFA, and also like the other activities that you organize as well, and also related to the future of jobs, making sure that everyone in this financial community is well trained and skilled to be able to respond to the new requirements in the finance sector.
Thanks, Yuki. So, Jenny, I already see a lot of potential future collaborations going on across this panel. From the perspective of, you know, being from HKMA, I just wanted to ask, in your important work at the Hong Kong GFA to promote transition finance, what more can policymakers do?
Yeah, look, I think, you know, the space is evolving very rapidly. I think what we do need is more open dialogue, collaboration between kind of like the regulators, policymakers, and the private sector. You know, I think we've done well so far in terms of, you know, providing industry feedback through the consultation on the ISSB, also through the Common Ground taxonomy as well. You know, I think having kind of like clear guidance and also input from the industry. So launching perhaps a framework, whilst it's not perfect, is probably a good start to actually seeing how the market actually adopts, and there will be changes that will happen kind of like along the way. So that open dialogue is really important. I think also going to the point in terms of integration with the GBA as well, and that connectivity with mainland China. I think we, under the Green Finance Association, we also are a founding member of the Greater Bay Area Green Finance Alliance that has another 7 working groups underneath, which is actually actively promoting harmonization of standards, taxonomies. It's also looking at new projects such as green securitization, the green maritime, which has also come up kind of like in the budget speech yesterday as, you know, areas of focus. And I think there's more work to be done there. So, you know, we act very much as a bridge and a connector to a lot of the regional kind of like GBA cities. And so I think we can help there to foster more dialogue and more action. And, you know, and finally, I think with also all this capacity building that we're talking about, you know, being able to be the bridge, and also bringing in together a lot of different organizations and different parties, not just NGOs, and also private sectors, but regulators. When we look at the Green Tech Summit that we helped support, that launched the Green Week, that was a collaboration across like the Science Park, also with GDI and GBA GFA, but then it brought together, I think, around about 50 tech companies from kind of like the mainland, Asia, you know, and in Hong Kong. And I think having that ability to convene and the ability to kind of like pull everything together, I think is going to be important. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. And finally, IFFO, from the banking practitioner's perspective, you know, what areas do you see as seeing the most need for capacity building and, you know, talent development for the industry?
Yeah, from bank's perspective, I do believe, whether we can speed up the entire, the transition finance activities really hinges on 3 T's: taxonomy, transparency, and transformation. So first of all, we are seeing, a raft of taxonomies, being developed in multiple markets. As just Dr. Ma mentioned, taxonomy could be, looking at whether activities is credible enough to be labeled as transition, and also the most recent one, the Shanghai transition taxonomy, it composed of, pathways for, different sectors. So I think Hong Kong as an international finance hub, we are dealing with, companies from across the region. So how can we, convey a better message and be, conduit for the funding that is, riding on, or defining their transition activities using these kind of taxonomies. I think this is, very important. So we do see that the common ground taxonomy, plays such an important role. Second is about transparency. Transparency is not just about disclosure. Like CDB has been doing a great job in, helping our companies in Hong Kong to disclose better, according to the TCFD requirement, so forth and so on. But I think there's also an importance in, getting the deal flow more transparent. So right now, obviously, for bond transaction is quite, publicly, available into the information. We can, look through, a platform like Bloomberg. But for loans, what about loans? Actually, the market has been doing a lot of sustainability-linked loan over the past couple of years. A lot of them are actually giving to, hard-to-abate sectors companies. So how well they are doing, how rigorous, those KPIs are set, against, 1.5, the ultimate goal. So I think if we can showcase more, deals from the loan space as well, it will, serve as, a knowledge exchange, and also we can the lessons learned from, these kind of transactions. And finally, it's about transformation. So banks, we are, as a funding provider, we play an important role in helping our clients to transform their business. So what makes a transition finance transaction credible? So there are already guidelines from CBI, from ICMA. So I think how we can, make such, the application of this kind of guidance framework more, widely adopted. I think this is, also an important issue for us to address. So I think in terms of capacity building, if we can do more around, these 3 T's, I think it will certainly, take our, effort into the next level.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for the panel for sharing all the insights. I think we have a few minutes for 1 or 2 questions from the floor. I see 2 from the floor. I think they are, we covered quite a bit on this already, but so one is what roles can Hong Kong play in facilitating transition finance, and also how can FI specifically be a key enabler for decarbonization. So maybe any last words from the panel to address these 2 a bit more, perhaps. Maybe Yuki?
Maybe on the second question.
Okay.
So finance, I guess most of you are financiers, so you I guess understand the power and the role of finance more than anyone. But at the same time, I guess you would also think that policy and other people's actions are more important than yourselves. I hear a lot that finance is more of a follower, and then I think that was the traditional role. So we are, in a way, asking finance to play a more proactive role in doing the engagement that Ivy was talking about to the clients, and getting them to respond ahead of maybe the next regulation to come out. And so I think finance plays a unique role because it goes across the economy and you're exposed to everything generally. So you will hopefully have the ability to be able to be a good advisor to the clients and the investee companies that you engage with, and be able to hold their hand in the transition.
I want to say something about the power of finance here. Although I represent the CDP, a not-for-profit now, I did spend 23 years in banking. I was the COO of Credit Suisse Hong Kong prior to changing my career 2 years ago to come to this. And to be honest, at the time, I was thinking, gee, I want to go to the real economy, do something that's close to the coal face of climate change fight, if you will, not finance. But now that I've learned about elements like scope 1, 2, and 3, I'm going to say it for the audience on the screen here. Scope 1 is what a company can control within its four walls. Scope 2 is where you get your power from, and is it green? But Scope 3 is your entire value chain. Is everyone who supplies to you, and even down to your customers. That's harder to control. And depending on the industry that you're in, then in manufacturing, your Scope 3 is, for CDP data, 7 times greater than your Scope 1 and 2 put together. If you're in retail or apparel, it's 20 to 30 times Scope 3 greater than your Scope 1 and 2. But in finance, that number varies wildly by estimates. It's 750 times, it's 1,000 times, it's 11,000 times I've heard quoted. That's leverage. To anyone who's in finance, then that is how much, if you exert power, as Ivy does, with Mizuho does, engaging your clients, encouraging your clients to go on a transition journey, you're not going to get to net zero as a financial institution unless all of your clients do. That's why you have an incredibly vested interest to help, but that's the power of finance, and we're all excited about that. Effort in the finance industry to help, as Yuki is trying to encourage here, encourage the real economy to decarbonize can have an immense impact. So you should be excited, you should be optimistic.
And just one final point, just in terms of Hong Kong's role in terms of transition finance. If you look at kind of like China being kind of like the world's kind of like highest emitting country, it's going to need a lot of transition finance. And I think it's quite clear that Hong Kong has a unique position to play as that super connector, kind of like with the ability to be kind of like the largest RMB kind of like hub. And so, I think, in addition to just bringing capital internationally into the mainland to help them decarbonize, and they need to basically, in terms of that 30-60 carbon neutrality targets. But then I also think in terms of the green technology as well that they have, that they can also share and deploy through the region. And I think that kind of like two-way flow of information and capital and technology is going to be really critical, and that's the role that Hong Kong will play.
And I certainly agree that, FI, we are really, enabler for the net zero world. And as, we've been, emphasizing, throughout the entire Green Week that the transition, activities require trillions of dollars. So definitely it's not going to be funded by one single FI. So collaboration is key. So collaboration with, GFANZ, with, CDP, with, and also with MDBs, in particular, whether we can further explore the blended finance model in order for us to, really channel enough, transition capital at scale and at speed. I think this is, really critical in the years to come.
Great. Thanks, everyone. And I'd like you to join me in thanking the great speakers today at our panel.
Welcome back, everyone. Our next panel is on case sharing on target setting, implementation, and client engagement strategies. Please welcome our moderator, Ms. Christine Low, Chief Development Strategist at the Institute for Environment at HKUST, as well as the following panelists, Mr. Isaac Yearn, Head of Corporate ESG and Corporate Affairs at Town Gas, Ms. Cecilia Lee, Chief Financial Officer at Waguan Maritime Transport, Mr. Mark Harper, Group Head of Sustainability at Swire, and Mr. Kelvin Au, General Manager and Head of Wholesale Banking Division at Bank of East Asia.
Thank you. Thank you for giving us an opportunity to talk about the transition for hard-to-abate sectors. So we have 3 hard-to-abate sectors here. We have energy, we have shipping, and we have aviation. Now, I think you know aviation and shipping are outside the Paris Agreement, but nevertheless, there's a lot of activity in those two sectors to get them to be more aligned. So we will have a chance to hear about that. And how are bankers going to deal with this? I mean, obviously, bankers are interested to finance the transition, but also we heard from Ivy very clearly just now what banks are actually having to do to be able to get a sense of their own climate risk and, of course, to help their clients to transition. So if I can actually go to Isaac first, who's with Town Gas, and of course, I don't need to explain to anybody what Town Gas does, but you may not know that Town Gas has a huge business on the mainland. And to clear my interest, I sit on the board of Town Gas mainland business, and it's truly fascinating because, of course, Isaac, what the company has to do is actually to transition. So you have various layers of timelines and requirements, right? For both Hong Kong and for the mainland, there are kind of territory-wide targets to reach carbon neutrality by a certain date. So perhaps you can just share with us, you know, in the energy industry, how are you really looking at these dates? What do they mean to you in terms of your strategic planning?
Okay, thank you, Professor Lo. I'm glad to hear to share with you all. First of all, I would like to share what we are going to do in Hong Kong. In fact, as a business providing, you know, gas to maybe most of you, we have been established in Hong Kong for more than 161 years. This year is 162. And at the beginning, we just provide gas to the Hong Kong government for supplying, you know, lighting the street lamps. But later, when the electricity invented, we lost our business. So it is not new to us that we have to transit, because I would like to share with you that just months ago, one of our senior guy, and he met our fund managers, etc., under the analyst briefing, under the analyst meeting. And after the meeting, the guy said, "Hey, mister, why are you still with this business? Because fossil fuel, okay, it is our, you know, sin, fossil fuel." So, in fact, we always have to strive for the advancement, for the better of our business. Because in Hong Kong, you may have a misconception that we are under-regulated, like our friends standing here, the power companies. But no, tomorrow, if you would like to have another gas company providing gas, thank you very much. Please leave a place for me. And so we are under very serious competition. When I'm a teenager, we can see the building site. They have hanged a flag, say the Town Gas. And there was a slogan, living the Town Gas way. Okay, so we have to compete that your general customers will not see. Okay, and what is our scene? Because even though we are so cleaner than our counterpart in Hong Kong, we only, in the world, there is only two gas manufacturers. They are selling Town Gas. One is in Hong Kong, one is in Singapore. We are not selling natural gas to you. We are selling manufactured gas, but our gas is very clean. We just contribute scope, when our production in Taipo plant, we only contribute 1% of the carbon emission in Hong Kong. And including when you have your cooking at your home, it just accompany not less than 5%. Okay, so we have to, when we are going to transit for this business, first of all, we have to try to reduce that 1% in our Taipo plant. But it is very, very difficult because our counterpart, they have, you know, very sharp decrease in the recent 15 years because they are using coal. Okay, but now they are transiting to, you know, energy, using the nuclear energy and also using the natural gas. So we have to try very hard to reduce the scope 1. Okay, even though we can get, in fact, we have our plan to take away the scope, the 1% by 2035, because the Hong Kong government has set a standard that by then the electricity emission just around 0.12 to 0.16 kilogram of carbon dioxide per kilowatt hour. Okay, if we reduce, we have our production become zero, we still have the emission when you are cooking at your home. Okay, so, and by then we still have higher than 0.12 to 0.19 kilogram per kilowatt hour. So if by then you people don't like us, say, oh, you are so dirty, you don't like us, so then I will lose my job. Of course, I've been already retired by then, but but it's another challenge that we have to lay for our future generation, right? I'm looking for another 160 years for this company. So what is the transition? It's technology, no problem. It's all about money. But I would like to say it's not just transition, because when we have to do some modification at our turbo plant, and then we can reduce the 1%. How about in the future, we have to use clean feedstock. Then when you cook at home, you will have no emission. That was the problem. That's not just transition. At the end of the day, all of us have to share this because we want a better planet.
Well, actually, you do have a problem, right? Because, I don't know, I'm a town gas customer.
Thank you.
But, you know, the power company is always suggesting that we should stop using you and use them because, and as you said, you know, their new slogan will be, we'll be lower carbon and we'll be zero carbon because we're going to buy nuclear power, then you're out of a business, right? So very interesting, in fact, to talk to you over time, how to watch, right? How an amazing company is actually going to make the transition. So perhaps another well-known company in Hong Kong, Mark Harper, who's with Swire, and I think many of you know him, and we wanted Mark to come today because he can share with us about aviation, about Cathay, which is again another well-known brand. So Mark, perhaps you can share a little bit with us about, you know, the timelines at ICAO. I mean, what are airlines supposed to commit to, and a little bit about, well, you know, how Cathay's, what competition is it facing? How bad is it compared to town gas position?
Okay, so I guess to put things into perspective to start off with, so global aviation accounts for about 2% of total emissions, but the expectation is that that will double by 2050 due to continued increases in air cargo as well as personal transportation. So it is a rising issue and an issue of great importance. I think we talked earlier about the scale of the challenge around Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3. So as you say, I sit at the holding company, so I sit at Swire Pacific. And Scope 3 accounts for 92% of the total emissions for Swire, of which 60% of that Scope 3 is our equity share of Cathay's total emissions. So we take about a 45% share of their total emissions within the Swire Pack level. So it's significant for us as it is for them. From the point of view of where the aviation industry is at, essentially, as you say, both ICAO and IATA, the two governing bodies for international aviation, and the airlines have both committed to net zero by 2050. Clearly, as a hard-to-abate sector, that's going to be incredibly challenging for them to actually achieve. And maybe we can go into what some of those challenges are a little bit later. How does that translate for Cathay Pacific? I should say another commitment within the international aviation is the CORSIA agreement. And so CORSIA basically commits aviation authorities that have signed up to the CORSIA to essentially achieve carbon neutral growth from a 2020 baseline. So any increase in emissions from that 2020 baseline have to be offset through the purchasing of credits, which is obviously a significant potential impact, although I guess a significant opportunity for those that are investing in the carbon markets. So for Cathay, what are they doing? Well, essentially, they've committed to net zero by 2050. A major part of that, and we can go into it in more detail later, is essentially committing to an uptake of 10% sustainable aviation fuel by 2030. So a major driver towards that carbon neutrality will be through, certainly in the medium to long term, the uptake of sustainable aviation fuel, because essentially for the type of traffic that Cathay has, so the type of business that we have, the power density required to get a plane off the ground and then keep it in the air essentially means that electric and hybrid technology for wide-body, long-haul aircraft is just not practical at this particular point in time. We're hopeful that by come 2050, there will be new aircraft emerging that will facilitate that. And obviously for short-haul, that electric hybrid aircraft may come online a little bit sooner. But for now, probably up to 2050, sustainable aviation fuel will be the core way that the industry can decarbonize, and the competition for that is huge, because to give us an idea of the scale of the challenge, I think if you look at total fuel supply in 2022, 0.4% was roughly around 0.4% was sustainable aviation fuel. So we've got to get from 0.4% to 10% by 2030, and ideally in alignment with the sort of like marginal abatement cost curves for the aviation sector, ideally in the 50 to 70% range by 2050. So it's a significant challenge.
Right. Maybe I can come to Cecile. You probably haven't met Cecile before, because the shipping sector, although very important to Hong Kong, doesn't get, I think, the kind of attention that other industries get, because most of the Hong Kong registered ship, and Hong Kong is a major ship registration center, their ships don't come anywhere near Hong Kong. So, but they're global business, and so they follow global regulation and thinking. So perhaps, Cecile, you can share with us, I mean, I know the IMO, the International Maritime Organization, is sort of the global regulator. Perhaps you can share a little bit with us, and where is the shipping sector going? What do you have to do?
Okay, thank you, Christine. So as you mentioned, IMO is the global regulator for international shipping. So basically, it looks after all the safety, security, and environmental performance. So basically, in 2018, they issue an initial strategy for all the shipping company. So basically, they set the baseline as a 2008, and then we need it come up some target. And also it mentioned, okay, all the details, because it only come up some short-term measures. So they mentioned all the things will be agreed in between 2018 to 2023. So last year, basically, IMO released a revised paper. I would say it's a very ambitious paper, this strategy. Basically, for carbon intensity, we need to reduce by 40% in 2030. And then for greenhouse gas emission, the target is 20% reduced by 20% by 2030. But they aim for, I mean, we can strive for 30%. So say by 2040, we need to at least reduce by 70%, striving for 80%. And then it almost also at a point very similar to aviation is that in 2050 is almost zero. Okay, but if we look at the paper, the initial strategy, basically it's very ambitious because originally the target is 50% reduction in 2050, but now it's come to zero. Another challenge is very similar to aviation as well. That's this net zero field that we need to put in place in this equation. So they expect 5%, striving for 10% in 2030. So it's a very ambitious target. And also it come up some short-term measures, as I mentioned. So maybe just give you some idea what type of measures. For example, it's very similar to what we have when we buy an aircon. So the focus is technical measures and operational measures. When you buy an aircon, you will look at the star, the 5-star rating, energy efficiency rating. So same for a shipping company. For the new design of the vessel, we have a class in our industry. Class is just an ISO accreditation organization. We need to comply, and then they would give us a certificate. For the existing vessel, for the new vessel, just give you some idea, like the largest container in the market. So if it deliver in this year or last year, basically, if we look at the energy efficiency, they have actually is a 50% better compared to the one produced in 2008. So you can see the effort that we make in this industry. And for sure, I mean, other than the technical measures, and then we have operational measure. Because if you have a 5-star efficient aircon, but how did you use it? Okay, whether you use it efficiently, that's the operational issue. So that's why IMO also implement a carbon intensity index and make sure all the players stick with this, to produce a record and say, okay, we are operational efficient. And this is short-term measures. And then IMO is putting a lot of effort aligning all the industry players, including port authority, country level, and down to a company level to come up with a long-term strategy. Not strategy is a long-term measure to meet this target. Basically, this long-term measures is about the global carbon mechanism, pricing mechanism. Because I think the objective is very good, given we know that it's very expensive to use the new fuel at the moment. So that's why they want to use this pricing mechanism. If the shipping company, actually, they emit more carbon emission, and then they would pay more. For this extra money they collect, there will be subsidy for the company using the green fuel. So I think there's a lot of measures and also a lot of discussion because, as you know, the vessels are running around the world. It's an international business. It's not just we need to comply the local regulation. As long as we get into other ports, we need to follow their own regulation. And then we have an international level to comply with as well. That's the challenge.
Well, I think you're more complicated than airlines, right?
Yes.
Right.
Also, I think because you take a flight, okay, or you may, that's very direct. Okay, but shipping is quite slightly distinct, I would say.
Right, you're going. I'm flying from one place to another.
But you also have a ship.
It's a similar issue. So obviously one of the issues around fuel would be...
Their ships are almost running like an Uber.
Yes.
Right? Whereas you're at least going from A to B.
Yes, but
Once
obviously
you
need the fuel at both ends.
Yes.
Which is one of the challenges. So you need the establishment of green corridors, and that's where the importance of major aviation hubs stepping up to the mark, and we've seen that in Singapore, the UK, the US. Hong Kong has a long way to go on that. It's great that in the budget announcement and the CE policy address, they've highlighted the need to look at sustainable aviation fuel, but I'd say they're a good 3 years at least behind some of the other markets. Singapore have already put in place a fuel mandate. So
we'll come back to your pain point in a minute, but we'll go to your banker, because again, the BEA is a well-known local bank, and I presume all three of them are your clients in one way or another, right?
Yes.
So now that you've heard their emissions profile, what do you want to say to them?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't say that the bank on the banking side we are more complicated or not, but definitely more things are out of our control in a way. Okay, one very important figure is that in terms of the scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions in a normal commercial bank like us, like BEA, actually more than 99% of our total emissions is scope 3 emissions. That means finance emissions. Them, yes. And all of you, if you have a mortgage taken out from Bank of East Asia. So when we have to achieve any net zero target, no matter by 2050, which is the target set by ourselves, then we have to manage that finance emissions. That means how to manage all you guys' emissions. So it's very important for a commercial bank to understand and support our customers' plan, our customers' transition plan. So by going for that, we of course, like the previous speaker in the previous panel, Ivy shared that different banks will have their own framework of managing these finance emissions. For Bank of East Asia, we have a 3 pillars framework. That means we have to cover all these 3 elements all the time. The first thing is climate financing strategy, so we know what to finance and what not. And then we should have customers' transition plan, and then we need to have our climate and ESG data under one consolidated database so that we can keep track of everything. So there are 3 pillars. And among all these efforts, we have highlighted 7 high-emitting sectors. You guys are obviously within those 7 sectors. The 7 sectors include energy, that means oil and gas, power, and then construction, and transportation, that means you guys, and then metals and mining, and property development, and finally manufacturing. So you can see that it basically these 7 sectors cover most of the economic activities in the world. So we have to have a very structured plan to go after all these sectors. So for every sector, we will develop a roadmap starting from emissions measurement. Okay, how much they have emitted, and then we need the transition plan, and then we would go after. We set target. We have the emissions measurement, and then we set target, and then we have customers' transition plan. So we have this kind of roadmap. So later on we may share more about how we expect our portfolio to decarbonize. When we decarbonize our portfolio, basically it means we must help our customers decarbonize themselves. Okay, so BEA right now is the first bank headquartered in Hong Kong to join the NCBA, Net Zero Banking Alliance, which is a UN-convened sort of group of financiers. So we can align our lending and investment portfolio about how we can achieve net zero by 2050 or earlier. So this is some of the efforts that we are making to not just help ourselves but our customers as well. Yeah.
Well, you have to tell us more later on. But if I can go back to energy, shipping, and aviation, right? You've given us the big picture, but you haven't really told us about where the pain points are. So maybe a little bit, I think you shared your pain point a little bit more. Competition is a real issue in Hong Kong. Yes. But, to do this kind of transition, tell us a little bit more about, how you really go about doing it.
Okay, I think we have 2 ways. We have already...
There's a question here, right?
Yes, sorry.
Yes. So it's very good, right?
Technology?
Yeah, well, the thing is technology, you all know you need to transit, but you're going to have to talk to your banker, how do you think the money, how will you finance it? One of our pain points, right? Money is always a pain point.
Yes, okay. I don't think it is very difficult for us because, as I mentioned, we just have 1% of emission, GHG in Hong Kong from our production plant. So the first thing we have to do is to make some alteration in our production plant in Tabo plant, and then we use clean fuel like bio-naphtha or green methanol or green LNG as our production fuel. This is not difficult. Of course, we have paid some money to do the transformation, but we dare not to ask you guys to pay for us, okay? And we will, from our own capital, to invest. So, also for technology side, it is already sophisticated. We heard that, like the Osaka gas in Japan, they've already shipped 1 green methanol from Australia. They just use the sunlight, the solar panel, to produce the hydrogen, and then they combine with carbon dioxide and became the green methanol, and then can use Huagang shipping to ship to Osaka, and then this is very clear, net zero. Okay, but at this moment it is a bit expensive, so we have to see whether, say, in 2050, it will become very, very cheap. This is for our own business. But how about other business? If by then the renewable energy we use is very expensive and we cannot transfer the money to your pocket, to the bill to you, are we going to lose our business? No, with another strategy. That means we will make other energy-related products and sell to them, because we have the SAF plant in Jiangsu province, and then now we are the second largest in the world, just after Nestle. EcoSeries is we have this company, and then we engage bank capital into us. This number one. Number two, we have a plant in Inner Mongolia producing methanol, and recently we have successfully making it as green methanol. And the beauty is that we already got the EU certification, and we already shipped 1,000 tons. It's very little, of course, last year. So if you are a shareholder, don't worry. Okay. Although we are now in breakout period, but will not tell you some figures. But yesterday, a cafe colleague was very frustrated. How the price of the SAF is 3 times of the traditional fuel, and also for the green methanol is $1,200 US dollar per ton, and then we are still expanding our capacity. So that's it.
Well, that's a great sales pitch, right? Don't worry. Well, no, this is very interesting, because actually here we're talking about 4 Hong Kong companies. 4 Hong Kong companies, very interesting. Town Gas is kind of getting ready, right? So one way is investments, right? You're investing in businesses so that you can be clean. And you've got customers right here, right, sitting next to you.
Thank you very much.
So, I've also read, Mark, in the papers about the SAF coalition in Hong Kong. So maybe that is part of the pain point, right? I mean, you need to cooperate, and then how much is it going to cost?
Yeah, so I mean, there are a number of pain points. I've touched on a couple. So one is obviously the maturity stage of some of the new and emerging technologies, which essentially means that we're having to lean on sustainable aviation fuel for the sort of like doing the majority of the lifting in order to get us towards the net zero target. The other is, and kind of touched on it there, the licensing to get approvals for use of new technologies is incredibly difficult, time-consuming and costly. Availability.
You're referring to SAF as well?
Exactly, yeah, because obviously there are different types of sustainable aviation fuel. So you've got some of the more simple methods, which is using like biomass and converting that into fuel, but then you've got power to energy, you've got liquid to gas, so that there are a number of new technologies, emerging technologies out there that are proving difficult to scale from a finance perspective, but also from a regulation perspective. There's challenges associated with the cost. So, we just touched on it there. Sustainable aviation fuel can be anywhere between 2 to 8 times more expensive than standard jet fuel, which when you consider about 40% of the operational costs of an airline is fuel, you can imagine what doubling of the fuel costs would do to your air ticket. Which then brings us on to another challenge, which is that the incredibly small profit margins for aviation. And so, again, any significant increases on those costs will have an impact. And so the need for a level playing field where essentially all airlines are adopting and taking up the use of sustainable aviation fuel is incredibly important, and that can only come through legislation.
But also, you have to have enough SAF, right?
Yeah, so again, that's also an issue, because as I said earlier, only about 0.4% is global fuel supply is coming from sustainable aviation fuel. But
if another new plant in Malaysia.
There you go.
It's under construction.
But the exciting thing about that is that 2 years ago it was 0.1%. Last year it was 0.2%. So you could argue that we're on the sort of like the uptick of the S-curve from an innovation perspective. So if it continues on that pathway, then that will be incredibly valuable. But that will be driven by the availability of finance and regulation. And it's, you know, to the point made, it's no coincidence that the majority of the fuel being produced by town gas is going to Europe. And that's because of the tax incentives and the legislative support that is being provided in order to facilitate that. That just doesn't currently exist in this part of the world, which is why pretty much all of the sustainable aviation fuel that we have identified as a solution to get us to the 10%, and we've pretty much identified a pathway to that 10%, is the majority of that is being sourced in North America.
Very interesting. Another dimension, right, to the headache. Cecile, your pain point. How are you going to manage all the pain points?
It's a lot. Okay, so I think before that, I briefly touched on the international business. So we regulate by different layer. So that's definitely is the key pain point, the alignment of the industry player, including all the stakeholders along the supply chain. And so that's why I think it's very challenging. So you mentioned that we're running like an Uber taxi. It's because the vessel that Wacom owns is more tanker and bulk carrier. So we receive a call from our charterer, and then we will go wherever they want. But if we look at the international shipping business, basically 30% of the vessel, the container. So very similar to aviation, point to point. So that's why it's it's relatively easier. For example, like Maersk, they invest quite a lot of money in the field study, and also they work closely with the port authority so that they can build the facility to help them to transit from the conventional field to green field. But for us, very difficult. So that's create another challenge for us. And so that's why I think for the industry, the feature of the industry is very difficult. If I purely look at ourselves, bulker and tanker, saying, okay, I'm ship owner, and then I charter the vessel to an operator. Okay, just like you listed a property on Airbnb, you buy the 5-star aircon, okay, which is good because you want to reduce your bills, right? But how can your cleaners or customer to use it? They may switch on the aircon the whole day and consume the energy. It's not efficient. So that's why sometimes because our charterer, they have a different agenda with, to us. They want to maximize their profit. But whether that's the best way to use our vessel in terms of to reduce the carbon emission and also the maintenance of the vessel is totally different story. So that's why I think for us, the key pain point is the alignment of the industry player. Especially, probably some of the participants here may heard about the EU ETS, which is I would say a unilateral regulation imposed by EU. Basically, all the vessels that we have, as long as you run into EU waters, you need to pay extra. You need to buy EU aid. You need to surrender. Okay, so that's why we experience, as a ship owner, we're a bit worried. Okay, we have the international IMO look after the regulation, but at the same time, down to country level, down to region level, they come up some regulation on the industry player. It creates some, definitely is a challenge for us. And then second ping pong, I would say supply chain. Okay, when I say share, okay, I'm keep losing my mind, and because definitely is a hurdle. As I mentioned, so we need to put the carbon net zero fuel into equation, and we need to at least 5%. So 5%, what does it mean? If we say 5%, because after that revised strategy came out from IMO, Japanese class society. So they come up with research. They mentioned if we want to achieve that 5% target, we need e-methanol. So we will be very happy. Okay, we need 21 million. Okay, if we want to meet the carbon, the greenhouse gas emission target, okay, reduced by 20% by 2030, we need 106 million tons. But if we look at the current market, okay, my numbers that we got on hand is 10 to 20,000 ton current production. You can see the big gap. So the gap, how can we fill the gap as a financier, as a industry player? How can we like catch up so that we can meet the first checkpoint? I think that's the other challenge. So that's why cost, for sure, as Mark mentioned, that for sure is one of our challenge. Because if I say, okay, I want to meet this target, okay, I'm happy to invest, but what's the, I mean, if without a stable, sustainable energy, I cannot design what sort of ships that I'm going to invest. It's a huge amount of commitment as a private company, private shipping company. So just give you some idea, like if we're going to invest in a mid-size bulk carrier, okay, currently the price would be around 35 million US dollar. And then if we want to use a green methanol, okay, as a fuel, I need to add on like 30 to 40% more, okay? But whether my financier, some of them sitting here, okay, they're happy to finance, it's all coming to numbers. Whether it makes sense, whether my freight weight can convert, okay, and pay the bill. So that's why when I said, okay, if I transport gas, okay, you will be my customer. But my customer said, they may not pass on the cost to the end user. So that doesn't mean that, okay, I cannot recoup our investment in this supply chain. I think that's the one of the challenges as well. Lastly, human resources, crew, pilot. So for us as a master, the ship captain, whether they know the safety, because for transporting ammonia, hydrogen, there's a risk. So let's, as a bank, just think about like what's cargo that we're going to transport in coming 20 years. We need the people because the vessel that we're going to operate is more sophisticated, more specialized. So that's why training is very important. I appreciate that yesterday the budget come out and mentioned about Hong Kong will provide some incentive to strengthen the human resources in these shipping pillars. I think it's a good news because that's, I mean, human resources is one of the key things that we find is a challenge for us.
I was just going to jump
People want to
in
be
quickly.
pilots, but they don't want to be seafarers.
Yeah, exactly.
So just on, Swire's also in shipping, right? And so another big challenge is the sort of like the standard fuel bunkering spots ideally located in relation to green fuels. So Singapore accounts for like I think around 40% of fuel bunkering. However, from the point of view of access to biomass for production of biomethanol, not necessarily ideally suited. So there may need to be a significant shift in the locations of fuel bunkering to actually meet the locations of where that biomass or the ammonia production is actually going to be based. Because for any green fuel, you need green energy. And again, places like Singapore don't have access to cheap and a high percentage of renewable energy. So again, that's a major pain point for the
Right. If I could,
shipping
because we
industry.
only have a couple of minutes left. So what I would like is for each one of you to say something about what you'd like the government to do more of, right? So we'll start with the banker, because they're all asking you to give them cheaper loans, right?
Yes, exactly. So it seems all the benefits would come up from the bank. Green loans must be cheaper, things like that. I think the government actually could play a very important role because, as Dr. Ma said earlier, some of the infrastructure part of green and sustainable financing is actually public goods. We have to have standards. We have to have a framework that are recognized by everybody. Then all the players would contribute their part. Right now, what we see in Hong Kong especially is that most of the government support measures would target the higher end or upper end of the ecosystem. For example, Hong Kong MA subsidies, they go for, they would be paid to the borrowers borrowing at least 100 million Hong Kong dollars. That means 90% of the companies wouldn't go for a bank loan of that size. So can we lower the limit a little bit to like 50 million or even 10 million. And when compared with a few years ago, actually there are already some very good developments in Hong Kong that are helping the SMEs. For example, HKQAA, the certification organization in Hong Kong, a semi-government organization, they are issuing certificates at a lower cost if the project is smaller or if the company is smaller. That would be a good way for us to encourage the SMEs to do that. And there are a lot more, because for these larger companies, they know how to do it, even though there are pain points, at least they are dealing with them. They're dealing with the pain points. But for many of the SMEs in Hong Kong, they don't even know their baseline. Not to mention when and how to achieve net zero. If they can't achieve net zero, banks can, and the whole Hong Kong can't. So I think there will be a very important public framework part the government can do. Yeah.
Okay, so just one line because we're out of time. Your most desired thing for the Hong Kong government to do?
Okay, so if you look at the sort of the demand signals from local and global aviation, the demand signals have been made. So many organizations, not just Cathay Pacific, have committed to 10% sustainable aviation fuel. So that demand now needs to be met, and that's where the government can step in. So what it can do is it can provide, as the UK is doing, as the US is doing, providing tax incentives to decrease the cost differential between sustainable aviation fuel and standard jet fuel in order to facilitate uptake. So that's a positive step that the government could take. Another is to provide, to step in and help de-risk the financing of building capacity. So there is insufficient capacity within Asia. Tangas are making some amazing strides, which definitely needs to be applauded, but there is a significant gap there. And one of the challenges that airlines, and I'm guessing shipping, are also experiencing is when it comes to the sign-off on some of these loans for the development of these facilities, there's an expectation that the airlines will commit to a 10 to 15 year offtake agreement in order to make the finance institutions feel comfortable with the risk exposure. And that is something that airlines have never done and shipping has never done. And so needs to be an alignment of expectation there, and government can come in and provide some of that financing to help de-risk, and that then takes the pressure off the airlines around signing up to incredibly long fuel hedges. That it would be very poor business practice to enter into.
Right, Cecile.
So I think because Ahmad already touched on like the funding, but basically I think two things. Okay, first, whether Hong Kong is possible to set up a shipping authority. Okay, as a individual shipping. I mean, shipping is always a important pillar for Hong Kong economy. But at the moment, we have a airport authority, but there's no shipping authority. At the moment, as I mentioned, the alignment of the industry player, especially for from the international level or country level, that's very important. But at the moment, only Hong Kong Ship Owner Association doing this role. If Hong Kong government can play a role, can voice out our opinion to international level, I think it's much better for the growth of the shipping. Second is funding as well. So yesterday, the budget mentioned for the e-methanol to help the ship owner to transit into this green fuel energy. Okay, that's a subsidy. But I very appreciate the subsidy amount, okay, because it's a good start. As a ship owner in Hong Kong, we're running the vessel outside Hong Kong. First, I need to check whether we comply, but for sure we are, because we're Hong Kong flag. But at the moment, I consider the amount's not enough. But whether it makes sense for us to keep asking government to provide us incentive or funding is not possible. We need industry player, including FI, including fund, sovereign fund, overseas, Hong Kong, okay, to provide a sustainable finance, because we know that bank can only play a role. Okay, they also need government support. If we have a private equity or other fund set up, it will be very useful for us.
Great. Last word from you, Isaac.
Thank you. I would like to see if the government could, for the legislation more faster for the application of hydrogen, because our pipeline in Hong Kong, we're producing town gas, you are using, we have 50% of hydrogen. And then we've already have MOU with the city bus company. And also we have another supply the gas to another recreational facility in Sai Kung for providing them providing hydrogen for them to for charging as electric charge for their private car. Another one is that I heard recently I read the news that the government already paid say 5.7 billion to buy the new ferries for us have enjoyed to the outlying islands. Will the company also pay, say 2,000 the money for the 2,000 bus using hydrogen? Then can use our hydrogen. Thank you.
Well, we learned a lot, right, from people who actually got to do it. So please put your hands together for the panel.
Thank you, Christina, our speakers. So for the last panel discussion, speakers will discuss investment opportunities and trends in the net zero transition of mainland and the rest of Asia, particularly in emerging markets and developing economies. May we invite our moderator on stage, Ms. Yukiyasu, Managing Director of Asia Pacific Network at GFANZ, as well as the following panelists, Mr. Zhang Jianyu, Chief Development Officer at BRI International Green Development Coalition, Ms. Emily Woodland, Managing Director, APEC Head of Sustainable and Transition Solutions at BlackRock, Mr. Vijay Pataparaman, Head of Eco-Transport at UBS Asset Management in Singapore, Ms. Da-Fei Kwan, Executive Director of FICC at CICC.
All right, so I'm back again, and thanks for staying on for this session. I think this is where we are going to be hearing from the financial institutions on more about what they're exactly doing around the financing of the transition. So you might have heard from, so just to give a big picture view of where we are, sustainable finance has moved quite a lot in the, especially since the Paris Agreement. And there's a Bloomberg NEF data where, it was all carbon high-emitting fuels that were invested, and they're tracking the investment ratio of how the investment ratio between carbon-related fuels and new clean energy fuels are changing over time. And I think last year was predicted to be the first time that it was more investment for every dollar of fuel. So for every dollar of fossil fuel, there were more investment. So it was like over $1 going into clean energy for the first time ever in our civilization. And that trend needs to continue, and it needs to continue much faster. Bloomberg says that it needs to go to 4 to 1. So for every dollar of fuel, fossil fuel investment, $4 need to go to renewable energy by 2030, and then even more up to 2050. Which means that it's not just about financing the green projects necessarily to get to 4 to 1, but actually, how do you actually transition your energy systems? And in Asia especially, and in Hong Kong as well, we have a lot of very young existing assets on fossil fuel-based assets, which means that their retirement is also something to think about in the energy transition, because they're obviously taking up the capacity and the finances, and to ramp up to the scale of 4 to 1 means that you are needing to work both on growing the green, but also retiring the brown to let the grow, more of that green grow. So with that, let me just get our financial institution experts to talk about what they are doing with their clients on this topic. So I'll start with Emily. Just want to know from your experience, does BlackRock clients Are you seeing any demand and awareness on the need to transition from your clients in Asia?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. And it's a real pleasure to be here today. So thanks, everyone. Sorry if you've heard me multiple times throughout this week. It's been a busy week. So look, strategies focused on the transition to a low carbon economy are definitely emerging as a theme with our clients, both globally and in Asia. And to your point about that being kind of, that transition from A to B on top of what is already well understood to be sustainable and green. Clients are kind of looking to either meet certain commitments or they're looking to tilt their portfolio according to certain risks or to capture certain opportunities. Last year, we undertook a global institutional survey of about 200 institutional investors, and about 56% of those respondents indicated they planned to increase their allocation to transition strategies in the next 1 to 3 years. And close to half of the APAC respondents indicated the same. And a lot of those clients have actually already made some kind of net zero commitment or emissions reduction commitment. And so they're looking for help with how to actually implement that across their whole portfolio, which is actually quite a big shift vis-a-vis what you might have seen in the past where there was just sort of a token allocation to the side in something small. So obviously our role is to help them navigate those risks and opportunities and also to provide the kind of solutions and choice that help them achieve that across their portfolio. So last year we established our transition platform, which complements our existing sustainable platform. And right now, that kind of constitutes about $130 billion of assets under management globally, and that extends across index, active, and private market solutions. What we're seeing with clients globally, but also here in Asia, is there's kind of 3 broad approaches that we're seeing them take. I'll start with kind of the one that represents the bulk of the portfolio, which is really how we talk about core replacement. And we're seeing long-term institutional investors like pension funds, like insurers, think about how to decarbonize their portfolio, both to manage risks, but also to meet public commitments. And, they're doing this through broad market indices because that typically represents the bulk of their portfolio. There's sort of two ways that we're seeing this happen. Sort of historically, there's been switches happen from traditional benchmarks to more climate aware or lower carbon versions of those benchmarks, like, for example, a Paris-aligned benchmark. So those switches have been happening for a while. What we're increasingly seeing now is more of an incorporation of forward-looking indicators into new index design or customized portfolio construction. So incorporating things like temperature alignment or company target setting or climate risk management scores or green revenue, green capex, things like that. So that's in kind of the bulk of the public markets portfolio. Then on the active, sort of more thematic side of things, clients are really interested in the alpha generating opportunities associated with the transition. So concentrated portfolios that lean into some of the tailwinds that you might be seeing, companies that are benefiting from the structural shifts that you're seeing in policy, technology, consumer and investor preferences. The third bucket, which is resonating particularly well in Asia, is private markets and especially infrastructure. Obviously, the market environment that we've seen in terms of market volatility as well as the increase in inflation is leading a lot of investors to gravitate to infrastructure, which is particularly relevant here in the APAC region. And to bolster that, what we're seeing is more innovation in public-private partnerships that bring together governments, investors, and other market stakeholders, particularly to be able to solve this issue of climate infrastructure in emerging markets. We've obviously undertaken a few examples of that ourselves. The most recent example being the announcement we made at COP28, where we're partnering with Altera, which is the UAE's $30 billion climate vehicle that's investing in global but also emerging markets infrastructure. So I'll stop there. That was a lot of information.
Yeah,
sorry.
No, that's really interesting. Can I just ask a follow-up question on the blended finance opportunity? Is that still very experimental or is it maturing? Where do you think we are?
Yeah, we've been reasonably front-footed on this. So in 2021, we closed something called the Climate Finance Partnership, which was about $673 million. And that was a 4-to-1 ratio of private capital to catalytic capital. So we had a consortium of 22 global investors, and that was across institutional, foundational, and catalytic money. That's already out there deploying. We've already we've already made investments in Malaysia, Thailand, Philippines. They were all new markets for us. And certainly a lot of interest in how we might be thinking about growing that franchise going forward. So, yeah.
Yeah, so I think you touched upon a lot of innovations in sustainable finance. One is the Paris-aligned indexing. I think that's still evolving and it's something that GFANZ has a work stream globally. I think BlackRock it could be involved in that one as well. And the other one that you mentioned about forward-looking metrics, I think that one, the investor community is much more advanced than the banks. But I think there's a global push to do more than just, being measured on your performance as a financial institution committed to net zero on your financed emissions. So yeah, and then blended finance, that's a very fascinating area as well. Thank you. So now let's move on and I'll move to Dafe. Yeah, so CICC wants to understand a bit more about your ESG strategy and what impact is that making to your investments?
Sure. I work for the fixed income department, so my perspective would be something quite different from what Emily was saying and what our previous panelists were saying from the commercial banking sector. I think it's a underrepresented or not very up in the forefront kind of segment. So from our perspective is that, like many other panelists were saying, transmission financing, the guideline, the technology is not yet that mature yet. But where do we start? We got to start from somewhere. So I echo to a lot of mentioning about data and transparency, and actually ESG disclosure is the latest buzzword as well. So we started from this front. On the bond investment, we developed our own fixed income ESG investment handbook. So basically in domestic mainland China, we ranked over 4,000 issuers looking into grabbing their data all around on their ESG performance. So that's our first step. Now, what's the second step is if you look at the debt capital market, what else can you do? ABS, it is further away from the underlying project. But what can you do? You need to dig a lot deeper. So we had to work on a lot more data and building on the issuers' ESG rating and portfolio, we need to look through to what potentially we can find on the underlying assets. Then we come up with the ABS, structured product ESG rating system for our own selves. Now, last year, the Chinese regulators started the C-rate market, which is going to play a very major role on supporting the high quality development strategy because it's include renewable energy, logistics, warehousing, all of this major infrastructure underlying project. So we're very keen to play a leader in understanding how do we rate ESG and incorporate ESG in the pricing evaluation in this new asset class. So we started working on that as well. And fortunately, I think we've taken a very important first step and we've already come up with our own ESG rating system. So that's been a very exciting but also very challenging developing pathway we have gone through on the ESG development. In terms of impact, as you mentioned, it's been very, very rewarding. Without that ESG evaluation system, we wouldn't have been able to, as the secondary market trading team, to be able to really participate in some really flagship underlying projects. For example, on the smart grid integration and some national demonstration projects as underlying assets. And we're very proud to say we participated in that, and not only that, but we are able to track the social kind of revenue sharing scheme is built under the initial developers in this project. And also, I think the work we have been put together has been driving for more ESG disclosure, and unfortunately, we're seeing the regulators are working on this as well. So just as 2 weeks ago, 3 major stock exchanges in China called for public consultation in the ESG disclosure in the major listed companies for mainland China. So basically from 2026, the companies will have to be mandatorily reporting their ESG reports for the financial year 2025. And so finally, we are also very glad to see all of this driving together. We are able to play a pioneer leadership in creating all this disclosure system.
Thank you. Daphne, maybe quick question around your evaluation and rating of your clients or your investee companies. So what do you do with that rating? Do you go back to them to give feedback and use it as an engagement? And do you use it in your selection of your investment decision?
We mainly use for our investment decisions. But what's interesting is because it's beyond the issuers or the project developers, there is a further layer, other service providers in the financial sectors, the securities firms. So we will be doing a lot of interaction during the roadshows and providing our feedback by asking a lot of questions. How do you do that, right? And can you provide me more data, more information on your social aspect, for example? I think by raising a lot more questions and that interaction will help.
Thank you. Moving on to Vijay then. So I think you are an expert in the transport and infrastructure sector. So how does UBS identify these suitable infrastructure investment opportunities, say in the transport sector where you are focusing on, and especially in the developing economies in Asia?
Right, so I'll get to that. Before that, I'll just give some spiel on UBS. So sustainability is a core strategic imperative for UBS as a firm. And within asset management, we manage about $270 billion across asset classes in SI and impact. I work for a group called REPM, which is Real Estate and Private Markets. One of the advantages we have as direct investors, we don't invest into public equities, so which is why I consider myself pretty lucky, is we go with a blank sheet of paper, right? And then we can design what clients want and what, if the opportunity is there in the market and what the client wants. As per the survey results in 23, that's the latest survey I've seen, the top 3 requirements for clients have been climate and energy transition, right? Forestry and agriculture, and finally, they're looking at health. And coincidentally, or maybe it is design, a lot of our new products are focused on these sectors. In REPM, increasingly, we are focused on sustainability. In real estate, we have a tie-up with one of the leading designers in the world, design firms in the world. We are looking at a multi-asset solution. And within infrastructure, I've spent about 30 plus years in the sector. Within infrastructure, apart from your regular producing clean energy, right, that is passé now, it's been going on for a long time. We're also looking at energy storage development in transportation, which is a strategy I'm focused on now, decarbonizing across transport value chain. We focus, because it's such a big sector, right? I mean, some people tell me it's $8 trillion are needed to decarbonize. Some people say 16 trillion. All I'm saying is once I see trillion, beyond that, I don't even count because it's large enough, right? It's a huge sector. So one of the disadvantages of such a huge opportunity set is you keep tripping over everything looks interesting, right? And therefore, we go back to what you had said, data. For us, data is extremely important. So we have now identified few sectors where going green, and I'm just using this word very loosely, going green actually makes money. So I still remember, as an aside, in the 80s and 90s in China, you know, people were going from wet line to dry line cement plants. And cement, we all know, is extremely carbon intensive. But going from wet line to dry line actually reduced your energy intensity by half, and your water intensity reduced by 95 or 98%, I forget, and water is energy anyways. But what it did was, because the energy intensity reduced so much, your cost structure reduced by about 18%, and in commodities, if you have an 18% difference in cost structure, you anyways rule the market. So there are a lot of sectors available in transport where actually, if you go green, you either make money or you save money. It's two sides of the same coin, right? And we've tried to identify those sectors. So that's what I said. I'm at a more advantageous position that I can design the sectors I want to look at. And we look at sectors where we have our own life cycle analysis model, where we look at what is is there a real carbon impact, carbon reduction impact, and is there a real economic impact? And once we have these two, you know, tick marked, it takes a lot of time to do it. But once we get this done, then we focus on those sectors.
And how easy is it to find that kind of, you know, golden combination of making money and having a climate impact?
You know, I want to say it's like really easy. It isn't. We've done a lot of work, a lot of primary work. But having said that, it's there. So I'll give you an example. Terminal tractors, right? These are, so most people are going after, you know, shipping or airlines, right, to decarbonize. I'm saying that's tough, that's hard to abate, right? But at least, what about ground, right? Port. Is a port relatively easier to, you know, to reduce carbon emissions, right? In airports, right, with ground support equipment, is it relatively easier to reduce carbon emissions? It is, and it accounts for maybe 30%. If you look at the whole value chain of transport, it probably accounts for 30%. Ground surface transport, right, accounts for over 50%, right, of the potential reduction in carbon emissions. So why can't we focus on those sectors? You know, we all seem to be taking a hammer and hitting, you know, the problem with a hammer, saying that we need subsidy. I mean, I'm all for subsidy. If you give me subsidy, you know, I'm very happy with subsidies. But our basis is that there are enough sectors available where if you decarbonize, you can actually either save money or make money. And if we just focus on those, we can still create very big impact on the total carbon emission.
Yeah, great. Okay. Then let me turn to Zhang Yu. How does your organization, BRIGC, bring various stakeholders to the table, for example, international organizations, governments, private sector, and civil societies? And also ask you a second question, where do you find the common ground when it comes to the net zero transition?
Well, thank you very much. And I really like actually the second part of the question more than the first one. Although I have to say, you know, BRGC was, you know, personally launched by President Xi during the first BRI summit in 2017. And we actually officially got registered to be the first China-based international environmental organization on June the 9th last year. So we're really here to network. We're the coalition. We're trying to correlate, you know, all the stakeholders into moving to a green world, but starting with the green BRI. I said I really like the second part of the question better or more because you know, I've been hearing all the discussion this morning, but I sort of feel that yes, I mean, you know, transportation is important, aviation is important, but you know, guys, we need to look at the bigger picture. What's the bigger picture, right? Everyone's talking about Paris Alliance, but what does Paris Alliance mean? That's why I think I was really excited of the outcome from the Dubai meeting that came out last year. You know, I've been going to the COP meeting since Copenhagen, and I have to admit, full disclosure, I've never been happier, excited, and feel really we have the issues in our hand till we have the Dubai agreement coming from the COP 28 last year, because it was the first time that I think we have put a concrete target on the table that really go into the solution of the overall climate change that's going to be really hinges on as the UNSG Secretary General has declared that we need to have the 40% reduction by 2030. If not that, we're toast, right? We're not, not even talking about 1.5 degree, the 2 degree, let alone of the 1.5 degree. Okay, so why did I say that? Because I think, it was only through the buy of the triple of the renewables, as we all know, and to get to a number, and some people do the calculation of 11 TW. You talk about big numbers, when you go to the trillions or the TWs, you get many zero. But let's put that into perspective. I think the only reason why that commitment can be agreed upon by the 116 countries, I think is really because two factors. One factor is in this field we have a saying that we're now into the one word. What do I mean by that? One means finally right now we have the cost of per watt of installed capacity of renewables getting close to $1 per watt. So it's $1,000 per kilowatt. And also for every kilowatt hour of electricity generated by the renewables, the cost is getting close to 1 cent. Think about it. When I got into this business 25 years ago, it was almost like 20 times as expensive as what it is today. And I think that's really, it was that sort of cost issue that really gave the people the confidence that we are finally have the issues under our grasp. I came from I was in Indonesia, and I just arrived in Hong Kong this morning. But last night when I was stuck in the traffic, crawling through the busy street of Jakarta, surrounded by all the two strollers, I was sort of asking the question myself, scratching my head, saying, "Gee, I mean, are we talking about sort of what are we really talking about? I mean, what's the implication of sort of the surrounded all the two strollers into heavy pollution in Jakarta? What's that connected with climate change?" And I think that's, if you really go and talk to the developing countries, which, by the way, other than China, U.S., and Europe, accounts for about 60% of the global emission, right? If you really want to have that issue handled, you need to go into their heart and to entertain what they really, really aspire. I think what they really aspire for nothing strange, right? Clean water, clean air, healthy food. But I'm not saying they're against climate change. They also want to entertain, really embrace that. But they have to solve all these issues at one time. So again, I was really excited. If you're in the field, you probably heard something called the V20, the vulnerable 20 countries. Right now, totally 68 of them. And right now, they have come out something called CPP, the Climate Prosperity Plan. And finally, they're putting the two issues together. So, sort of improving their climate performance, reduce their emission, is in line with sort of their own prosperity, also solving the poverty alleviation issues. Because of what? Because of the massive building of the renewables and massive transformation of the energy system. And I think that's really sort of the things that I think we need to focus on. That is the bigger picture. Well, we're here, we're talking about the finance. Then let's talk about some of the finance. I think some of the most recent numbers I got really excited is, I don't know whether people here, IMF people, I think the RST is really something sending a really positive signal, right? The goal is to $60 billion. I think they have started with $60 billion distributed, going into the central budget of all those countries with no strings attached, but with the focus, to beef up really the energy building of those countries. I was, again, in Dubai. You have all the MDBs lining up one after each other, competing with each other about a bold or bolder target they have committed. By my calculation, starting from World Bank and also to all the regional banks, AIIB, New Development, all together, they have made a renewed commitment about $268 billion renewed commitment, going into this field. I think it's something even more encouraging. China itself, President Xi himself made the announcement China is going to put forward $100 billion, supporting 1,000 small impactful projects, mostly going into the field of the green. So everybody is putting their money on the table, really trying to focus on this issue. So now I'm going to go to sort of what we are doing at the BRGC in viewing and anticipating sort of this whole global need, for the finance, and also what Chinese government is putting there on the table, we actually launched something together with a whole bunch of partners, including HKMA and also HKES, called the GIFP, Green Investment Finance Partnership, which we line up. Actually, CICC is also one of the partners launching this together, really to figure out a way with that kind of money on the table that how we can, so glad you mentioned about blending finance, carbon finance, also another one, those tools that we can really not only get more money on the table, but also improve the efficiency of the use of the money so that we can together to have the triple renewable target achieved. There I need to mention a little bit, we probably all familiar with something called the JETP, Just Energy Transition Partnership. But if you read the op-ed I published on South China Morning Post right after the BRI summit, the GIFP was really designed as a bottom-up approach to work together and to complement with what the JETP was supposed to do. But I do have a sentence there saying that if JETP becomes prohibitively cumbersome, then GIFP, as a bottom-up approach, probably can play a bigger role. Again, if you follow JETP closely, you know what I'm talking about.
Great, thank you. Just to follow up a question then. So GFANZ is involved in the JETP. So we understand your opinion of how difficult things are on that one. Just on the blended financing aspects of the GIFP or the JETP, I guess these kind of public finances, private finances, MDB money, government money, they play a different role. And you were mentioning about the improvement of the efficiency of finance when you blend things together. Do you think right now we have solved that question of which kind of money works best within the blended finance area? Or is that something that is still being kind of researched and piloted and experimented at your GIFP?
Well, in this field, when you go to the sort of, improve the overall effectiveness and efficiency of the money, the most famous thing is probably the quote from Barbados, Molly, of the Bridgetown proposal, which is to completely sort of reshuffle the global financial institutions going toward climate change. Well, I think we have run into walls, even though with renewed commitment, let's say from the World Bank, with all those 6 sort of a category of actions they're going to take, including one that they're going to shift to 45% of their investment to climate aligned investment by 2025. I personally have a doubt of it that I checked with some of my friends at World Bank. I think some of them is going to be achieved through creative accounting, so to speak. But I think right now we're in a new world, in my view, a paradigm of what redefined the blended finance. I mean, in the old days, we'll talk about how the MDB is going to be leveraged on the private sector. IMF has put a multiplier 1.2 to show how failure that has been. Right now, I think we cannot wait, because we cannot wait the overall sort of reform of the World Bank to have that achieved. But I think we have seen some really encouraging signs. People are going to take a bottom-up approach, particularly with the philanthropies, with the private sector money, so that the risk can be hedged from the bottom, something called the project preparation facility. So elevate the project readiness to a level that can be entertained by CICC or BlackRock, and then going to blend the money, the $268 billion all the MDBs have committed. So it's a reverse blending that I think is happening right now, because we just need to have that really early stage of the risk being hedged. The money is actually there.
I agree. Thank you. That was very interesting. So how much time do we have left for the second round? Okay, great. So we'll quickly go for the second round of questions. And if you can focus your answers around more of the bigger picture trends and what you see from your own experience on these trends. So going back to Emily then, what are the structural shifts associated with low carbon transition that creates investment opportunities in Asia, especially in the emerging markets of Asia?
Yeah, no problem. So last year we released something called the BlackRock Investment Institute Transition Scenario, which is essentially our own house view of how we expect the transition will unfold across different economies, sectors, businesses, and rather than it being sort of couched in a normative end goal that we want to happen, this is actually more about what we think will happen. And I'm going to apologize to VJ because I am actually going to throw out some big numbers here, but this is more to illustrate a trend rather than an absolute amount. So that model predicts that around $4 trillion of capex per year is going to go into the global energy system by 2050. And that's about a doubling from where we're at right now. About 70% of that number by 2050 will be going into low carbon energy sources. How that then kind of translate down to the APAC numbers, so for APAC, that will be about $2 trillion per year by 2050 into the energy system, and that's also a doubling from where things are right now, and about 50% of that number will be in low carbon solutions. Now, obviously, nowhere are the dynamics of the transition more multifaceted, and actually the opportunities are more exciting than what we've got here in Asia, but it is a very kind of multi-angled transition because we've got the interplay of policy, technology, consumer preferences all kind of working together or even against each other in some cases. And I think in Asia, and particularly EM Asia, we're facing a very structurally different transition to what we might be seeing in OECD because we've got a different policy environment, we've got stronger energy demand growth, we've got a higher cost of capital, we've got greater exposure to physical climate risks. So in essence, we're sort of seeing a two-speed transition, which is particularly pronounced here in the APAC region. We've got the fast lane, which is where we see sort of power and the property, the building sector being faster to decarbonize. And that's because lower cost of renewables, ease of electrification, ease of energy efficiency improvements. And so to some of Vijay's points, we see opportunities not just in renewables, because, as you said, that's been around for a while, and I think that's funding itself quite well, particularly in developed markets. We do see opportunities in emerging markets in renewable infrastructure still, and that's the blended finance platform that I mentioned earlier that's still deploying in that space. But really, as you said, it's actually about the whole energy value chain around that as well. It's the storage, it's the transmission, it's what's happening with the actual end consumption of the energy. In the slower lane, you heard a lot about this in the previous panel in terms of the heavy industry sector, and this is where kind of the low carbon alternatives are just not cost effective right now, and we've still got limitations in technological advancement happening there. Now, obviously, with APAC more heavily exposed to heavy industry and with younger assets than perhaps the average in the rest of the world, where this amplifies the challenge a little bit, and where we're deploying money right now in kind of early stage technologies like hydrogen and CCS, and they're not necessarily that's not investment we're making directly into Asia, but it is into like technologies that will ultimately benefit Asia if they can reach a tipping point that can be deployed across this region in heavy industry.
Great, thank you. So you're investing a lot in the immediate decarbonization, but also the long-term solutions as well. Yeah, okay, great, thank you. Defe, coming back to you, what do you think would be the sustainable investment trends to watch in the Asia's fixed income markets for this year?
Sure, I think, again, I use China as an example. If we're talking about the major emitting sectors, as mentioned, the energy sector and also the other sectors, at the moment, the energy sector, the electricity generating sector has been included as the regulated compliance carbon market. And for those key players, they are emitting about 45% of the national emission. So what is going to happen, right? Renewable energy has been going on for years. However, we can see it's still going very strong. So for 2024 this year, I think that the projection is the investment will continue, especially offshore wind. It will come up with another 80% increase of new installed capacity. And then obviously the grid need to be upgraded or improved in order to resolve a lot of integration and the transmission problems. So a lot of investment is expected to go in the grid as well. And for this year will be 10% incremental investment in smart grid. And also if we look at the transport sector, electrifying the transport sector, it's still high on the agenda. So the projection is another 12 million EVs will be in the market this year. So these are all going strong. So I don't have on top of my head the figure for the heavy emitting industries. However, if you look at what's going on in the regulations where the Dr. Margins mentioned a number of cities already published their own transmission taxonomy. This is very helpful. And the central bank just also announced it's working on the very expected to be faster development of the transmission taxonomy covering 4 major sectors, from power, from iron and steel, and agriculture and construction. So all of these are building up the enabling environment for the transmission financing to happen for these sectors as well. And finally, just touch on something in between the mechanism to link the two together is the carbon market, where the State Council approved the management regulation for China's compliance market. And also last month, China's CCER, the voluntary offset market, officially kicked off. And all of these are mechanisms to enable the heavy investors who to have a more incentive to drive for more investment in decarbonizing technology, and also the green sectors to have extra avenue for green financing. So I'll stop here.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for touching on the carbon markets. I think that's also a development that will continue this year as well. Then Vijay, so you were talking about the impact side of what you do. So what are the challenges in assessing a project's environmental, social, and financial impact? And specifically, how can investors avoid the transition washing traps?
Right. So let me try and answer it at two different levels, right? So one is we have a very robust system. So one is the systems approach. The other is specifically as a direct investor, what I do, why I'm feeling comfortable that we don't really need to indulge in any form of transition shifting or whatever you call it. So first is the intentionality. What is your intent, right? And intentionality drives everything. So from my perspective, if you have robust, saying that I want to reduce carbon is good, but then if you are able to put robust scenarios, right, create and use robust scenarios, then you're going to find, your intent is very clearly defined, right? The second is additionality. So whether I existed or not, would it make any difference to the decarbonization of whatever industry we're looking at? And if it's a natural course, then there is no additionality. But if because of me something is getting accelerated, there is additionality, right? And the third, of course, is clear, internationally well understood metrics, right, and measurement. So if we are, if we say, yeah, we've done a good job, that's good, but we are able to say we reduced emissions by 30%, 40%, whatever. I mean, there are certain, trajectory which we can show. Again, it makes everything a lot more real. So this is broadly what I would say, intentionality, additionality, and metrics. But two other aspects of this is, one is if we make it convenient to decarbonize, and two is if it is economically sensible to decarbonize, right? So just by decarbonizing, if you're able to reduce cost structure, there is no incentive to do any kind of washing, right? So because you're actually making money by reducing your carbon intensity. And therefore, like I said, again, I'm speaking from a very specific viewpoint here, which is I have a blank sheet of paper, and I'm able to design a system where if I reduce the carbon intensity, I actually make more money.
Yeah. No, I like what you raise about convenience and economic sense. I think convenience is really something that it's a behavioral change that, it really makes the behavioral change much more smoother. Yeah, thank you. Then Jian Yu, so for you, some high emission industries used to be or still are the backbone of the Chinese economy. And where do investments and business opportunities lie in the low carbon transition in China and abroad?
Well, let me sort of put a sort of a hypothesis on the table, and then when we talk about sort of implications, as long as we talk about the big numbers, trillions, we need to be aware this is not the first time that global effort is there on the table. Back to 1992, when the real SDG goals were agreed, that the global north is supposed to commit 0.7% of their GDP, helping the global south. As much as the money has been put there, that I think people have been intimidated not to do an assessment of the effectiveness of the money when we talk about the trillions, because for a variety of reasons. So I always ask the question, when we talk about, again, using big numbers, again, $2 trillion, for the developing global south, for the low carbon transition, if we have that money on the table, how can we guarantee and make sure the money is spent effectively, efficiently, and really get the results that we want? Because I don't think we have the infrastructure system there yet, not to mention about the governance system. That's why I think for the IMF, for the RST, they do not have any strings attached, but they have one condition, which is the receiving country needs to improve their green governance system so as to be eligible for the RST money. And one strong indicator to use for that is to put the price on carbon, because pricing carbon, as much as the role it has played historically, but I think it has a new role to play today to really facilitate enhanced disclosure, accountability, and improve the effectiveness, efficiency of the money when we're also talking about the volume. So I'm a big supporter of the market mechanisms, not only because of the efficiency, reduced cost, but I think also market system is really one way that can really survive from all the political turbulence that we are anticipating. I'm talking about geopolitical and election. I think by some people count 40+ elections going to happen globally this year. We need to have a system in place that can survive all those turbulence, that the SDG goals and low carbon goals can go further. And I think if we can have that kind of system in place, then penetrating into heavy industries, or other high intensive or emission industries, I don't think it's going to be as big an issue as it looks like, because you look at the bigger picture of reducing carbon rather than just sort of pin yourself in a specific sector. You need to look at the bigger, the holistic sort of picture. And that market system I'm referring to is the carbon market. I think we really need to have a revived interest into the carbon market to see the new role that it can play in the new journey that we're in together.
Yeah, thank you. The resilience of sustainable finance itself to weather any political and other factors is very interesting. And I also pick up on the carbon market development as being important. I agree. I think we're in a second stage of this conversation this year. So should we close this now? Yeah. Okay.